kept this house standing for 20 years because I believe my boys mind their way back.
She had nothing left to fight with.
There is nothing left to sell, no one left to call, and no way left to fight them.
Then 3 black cars stopped outside her gate.
She spent 20 years losing everything because of our family's lies. No one takes her home today.
3 men walked toward the house.
Our grandfather took us away from her when we were children, then made us believe she had forgotten us. We came back because she deserves the truth. This was in my hand when I was 8 years old. She carried me through floodwater because I could not breathe, and she never let go of me.
Celeste recognized it before she recognized him.
I know that flashlight, but that little boy was only 8 years old. Who are you?
They were not sent by the bank.
The bank did not send us. I am Owen, and we found every letter you wrote after they took us away from you.
They brought 73 hidden letters.
There were 73 letters hidden in our grandfather's private study. Birthday cards, Christmas you sent us was kept from us.
Every letter proved she never stopped loving them.
I wrote to all 3 of you, every birthmas, every time it stormed.
The brothers had believed she abandoned them.
We were children, and they told us you had moved on without us. For 20 years, I thought you had let us go because we were too difficult to love.
But their grandfather
He never left us.
had stolen the truth.
He lied to us because he thought money could replace the woman who made us feel safe for the first time. We found every letter you ever sent us hidden in our grandfather's private study. For 20 years, he made us believe you abandoned us, and he made you believe we forgot you.
To understand why those letters mattered so much, it was necessary to go back to the winter of 2004, when Celeste Morgan was 46 years old and had almost convinced herself that God had forgotten the prayer she had whispered for half her life. Celeste lived in a small, weathered house near the edge of Pine Hollow, Tennessee, where the road narrowed into old trees and rusted mailboxes. The house had belonged to her Aunt Evelyn, a woman who believed that every home should keep a light burning near the front door in case someone needed help after dark. Evelyn had been gone for years, but Celeste kept the habit. No matter how tired she was, no matter how high the electric bill became, the porch light always came on at sunset. Celeste worked before sunrise in the laundry department at Pine Hollow Memorial Hospital. Most people never saw her there. They only saw clean sheets folded in perfect stacks, fresh towels delivered to rooms, and uniforms pressed before the next shift began. At night, she cleaned the county archive building, where old records slept beneath dust and locked glass cabinets. Her days were long, her income was small, and her hands were always dry from soap and bleach. Still, Celeste gave what she could. She brought extra food to the church pantry. She volunteered twice a month at a weekend program for children waiting to be placed in foster homes. She kept a box of winter coats in her hallway closet. Most of them donated. Some bought one at a time from thrift stores after payday. The children who came through the program knew her as the woman who remembered their favorite snacks, who never forced them to speak before they were ready, and who understood that a child could be loud, rude, withdrawn, or angry without being bad. Years earlier, Celeste had lost 2 pregnancies. The second loss had nearly taken her life. After that, doctors told her that another pregnancy would be too dangerous. She had spent months grieving a future that no longer seemed possible, then years learning to live with the empty space it left behind. But she never stopped wanting to be a mother. She simply stopped saying it out loud. One rainy evening in November, after 2 exhausting shifts and a bus ride home, Celeste unlocked her front door and found a message blinking on her answering machine. It was from Cassandra Reed, a social worker who had known Celeste through the weekend foster program. Cassandra had a problem that could not wait until morning. 3 brothers had lost both parents in a highway accident several weeks earlier. Their father, Daniel Vale, had been driving home with his wife after visiting family in another county when a delivery truck crossed the center line during a storm. Daniel and his wife died at the scene. Their son survived because they were asleep in the back seat. The oldest boy was 14-year-old Owen, The middle brother, Matteo, was 11. The youngest, Silas, was 8. In the weeks after the funeral, the boys had been moved from emergency placement to emergency placement. One family agreed to take Owen, but not the younger two. Another said Matteo was too angry. A third said Silas's silence made them uncomfortable. The brothers had already begun to understand a terrible truth. People were willing to help them only if helping did not cost too much. The state was preparing to separate them. Cassandra knew Celeste's home was small. She knew Celeste did not have much money. She also knew Celeste had completed emergency caregiver training, passed the required background checks, and had been waiting for a placement that needed someone willing to care for children who had already learned not to trust promises. Celeste called Cassandra back before taking off her coat. By midnight, she had cleared the guest room, spread blankets across the old sofa, and pulled every extra pillow from the linen closet. She cooked a pot of chicken soup, though she had no idea whether any of the boys would eat it. Then she turned on the porch light and waited. The boys arrived after 1 in the morning. Owen entered first. He was tall for his age, thin in the way children become thin when stress replaces appetite, and he carried a backpack that looked too small to contain a life. Matteo followed with his hands clenched inside the sleeves of an oversized hoodie. Silas came last, holding a plastic grocery bag filled with folded paper stars. Celeste noticed immediately that none of them looked around the house with curiosity. They looked around it like prisoners measuring a cell. They had learned not to get comfortable. Celeste did not ask them to call her anything. She did not tell them everything would be fine. She did not ask them to smile for the social worker or say thank you for the soup. She simply told them there was food in the kitchen, clean blankets in the bedrooms, and enough room for all 3 of them to stay together. That first night, Owen slept in his clothes with his backpack under his arm. Matteo refused to eat until nearly 3 in the morning, when he thought nobody was watching. Silas sat by the window, folding and unfolding the same paper star until the corners tore. Celeste did not force him to stop. The first weeks were difficult in ways that no foster training manual could fully explain. Owen hid food under his bed. Bread, crackers, fruit cups, even half a sandwich wrapped in a napkin. At first, Celeste found it and almost scolded him. Then she remembered something she had heard from another foster parent years earlier. Children who have been moved too often do not hoard food because they are greedy. They hoard it because they do not believe breakfast is guaranteed. So Celeste placed a small basket in the pantry and told the boys it belonged to them. It was always stocked with crackers, fruit, cereal bars, and anything else she could afford. Nobody had to ask permission to take from it. Nobody had to hide it. Owen did not trust the basket at first. But after several weeks, the food under his bed began to disappear. Matteo struggled differently. He carried his grief like a match held too close to gasoline. A wrong look at school could set him off. A careless joke about his parents could make him swing before he had time to think. He had been suspended twice before Christmas, and once after, not because he enjoyed hurting people, but because anger was the only feeling he knew how to express without falling apart. Celeste did not excuse what he did, but she refused to define him by it. She introduced him to George Bell, a retired firefighter who ran a small woodworking program for boys at the community center. George had lost a son in the military years earlier and understood the language of grief that came out through broken things. At the workshop, Matteo learned to sand rough edges until they became smooth. He learned to measure twice before cutting once. He learned that strength could be useful without being dangerous. The first thing he made was a crooked wooden shelf for Celeste's kitchen. She hung it anyway. Silas remained quiet. For almost 2 months, he spoke only with his eyes, his hands, and the paper stars he folded from scraps of newspaper, old schoolwork sheets, and grocery lists. He lined them on the windowsill of his room, then moved them to the dining table, then placed one beside Celeste's coffee mug each morning. She never asked what they meant. She only kept them safe. Celeste had 4 rules in her home. The first was that whenever possible, everyone ate together. The second was that nobody would be punished for telling the truth. The third was that anger could be taken outside, written down, cried out, or worked through, but it could not be used to wound someone else. The fourth rule was the most important. The porch light stayed on until everyone was home. At first, the boys thought the rule was strange. Then they began to understand it. The porch light was not only for strangers, it was for Owen when he came home late from helping George fix a broken fence. It was for Mateo after detention. It was for Silas when he woke from nightmares and needed to stand on the porch steps, looking at something warm against the darkness. It was Celeste's way of telling them that no matter how difficult the day had been, there was still a place waiting for them. For a while, Pine Hollow watched from a distance. Some people were kind. The women at the church brought casseroles. George gave Mateo spare tools. A teacher at Silas's school quietly donated books with large pictures because she had noticed he liked to trace the drawings with his fingers. The woman at the grocery store began saving bruised apples for Celeste at a discount. But not everyone approved. Mabel Crew, who ran the weekly Pine Hollow Bulletin, had spent most of her life collecting other people's mistakes and turning them into public entertainment. She was the kind of woman who claimed she only cared about the community while making sure every rumor reached the community before the truth did. Mabel began with questions that sounded harmless. She wondered aloud how a woman with 2 jobs could properly care for 3 boys. She asked why the county would place children in an old house with a leaking roof. She hinted that Celeste might be accepting foster payments for reasons that had nothing to do with love. The rumors spread because rumors always spread faster in places where people know each other's business but rarely know each other's pain. Celeste heard them. She heard the whispers in grocery store aisles. She saw the looks when she walked into church with the boys. She noticed people growing quiet when she approached, but she did not fight every lie. She was too busy building a home. By spring, Owen had started helping her repair the back fence. He had a talent for fixing things without making a fuss about it. He could look at a loose hinge, a broken drawer, or a warped board, and somehow understand what it needed. Celeste began saving small amounts from every paycheck to buy materials. Owen gave up asking why she was spending money on a house that was barely standing and began helping her make it stronger. Mateo's grades improved, not because he suddenly became interested in school, but because George taught him how to take pride in learning something difficult. He started staying after class to work on math with a teacher who had once been afraid of him. He still had a temper, but now he knew anger did not have to decide who he became. Silas spoke for the first time on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Celeste had fallen asleep in the chair after cleaning the archive building overnight. The boys were in the kitchen, making grilled cheese sandwiches with more butter than necessary. Silas stood near the counter, watching smoke rise from a pan that had been left too long on the stove. Then he said one word. He said Celeste's name. Owen dropped the spatula. Mateo froze. Celeste woke so fast that she nearly knocked over her coffee. Silas looked embarrassed, as if he had broken something by speaking. But Celeste did not rush him. She simply smiled and told him she had heard him. That was enough. The real turning point came during the flood. In late January of 2006, Pine Hollow was hit by 3 days of relentless rain. The river rose. Roads vanished under brown water. Power lines fell across backyards. The town had seen storms before, but not like this. By the 3rd night, the electricity in Celeste's house went out. The boys gathered in the living room under blankets, while rain hammered the roof. Water crept beneath the back door. The porch light flickered, dimmed, then went dark for the first time in years. Silas had always been afraid of storms after the accident that killed his parents. But that night, his fear became something worse. His breathing tightened. His chest began to rise and fall too fast. The inhaler he had been prescribed was nearly empty, and the nearest hospital was across several flooded roads. Celeste tried the phone. There was no signal. She tried her car. The engine turned once, then died. The volunteer fire station was less than a mile away, but between the house and the station was a stretch of road already covered in water. Mateo wanted to go. Owen wanted to carry Silas. Celeste knew none of them could manage it alone. So she wrapped Silas in blankets, gave Owen an old flashlight, and told Mateo to stay close behind them. Then she stepped out into the storm. The water was freezing. The wind cut through their clothes. At one point, Celeste slipped near a ditch hidden beneath the floodwater and nearly lost her footing. Owen grabbed her arm before she fell. Mateo held Silas tight against his chest, even though fear had made him shake from head to toe. They reached the fire station just before Silas's breathing became dangerously shallow. The volunteers got him to the hospital in a rescue truck. Doctors later said that the timing had mattered. Celeste spent the rest of the night sitting in a plastic chair beside Silas's hospital bed. Her shoes were still wet. Her hands were raw from cold. She had not slept in more than 20 hours. When Silas woke, he looked at her for a long time. Then he gave her a name that did not appear on any government document. He called her Mama Celeste. Not loudly, not perfectly, but clearly enough for Owen and Mateo to hear. Neither of the older boys said anything. They did not need to. From that day forward, the house on the edge of Pine Hollow was no longer a temporary placement. It was home. Owen carved a small wooden sign and hung it near the porch. It read, "The Morgan Home." Mateo built a narrow bench beneath the front window. Silas placed paper stars along the ledge, one for every night the porch light had stayed on. For the first time since their parents died, the boys began planning for the future. Owen talked about becoming a contractor. Mateo wanted to build furniture. Silas had started making little drawings of houses with yellow lights in the windows. Celeste began the paperwork to move from emergency placement to long-term guardianship. And then Alistair Vale arrived. He came in a black car with a driver, 2 attorneys, and the kind of quiet confidence that made people step aside before he asked them to. Alistair was the father of Daniel Vale, the boy's late father. He was also the founder of Vale Holdings, a regional construction company that had grown into a national corporation. For years, Alistair and Daniel had been estranged. Daniel had walked away from the family business after Alistair refused to accept the life he wanted. He had married a woman Alistair considered beneath the expectations of the Vale name. He had moved away, worked ordinary jobs, raised his sons without asking his father for money, and kept the boys far from a world built on appearances. When Daniel and his wife died, Alistair had been notified through legal channels, but at the time, he had chosen not to act. The boys were grieving. The situation was complicated, and Alistair did not want public attention around a family conflict he had spent years pretending did not exist. Then an insurance settlement connected to the accident began moving through probate court. The existence of 3 minor heirs became impossible for him to ignore. Suddenly, Alistair discovered the importance of family. He told the court that he could offer the boys stability, education, medical care, private tutors, and a financial future Celeste could never provide. His attorneys pointed to the house's old wiring, the repairs Celeste could not yet afford, and the fact that her emergency caregiver status had not been converted into permanent guardianship. They did not accuse Celeste of cruelty. They did something more devastating. They made love sound insufficient. Cassandra testified that the boys were attached to Celeste and that separating them from her could cause lasting harm. George spoke about Mateo's progress. Teachers described Owen's new confidence and Silas's return to speech. But under state rules, biological kinship carried weight, and Alistair's attorneys knew how to turn every weakness in Celeste's life into evidence that she could not compete. The judge did not say Celeste had failed. The judge said the boys would be placed with their grandfather for their future. To Celeste, the difference meant nothing. The day they left was colder than the night of the flood. Owen stood on the porch for a long time, staring at the sign he had made. Mateo kept wiping his face with the sleeve of his jacket, angry at himself for crying. Silas held the battered flashlight from the flood night against his chest. Celeste packed what the boys were allowed to bring. Most of it was not much: clothes, school books, a few photographs, Mateo's first woodworking project, some paper stars. Before leaving, Owen slipped a folded piece of paper into the kitchen drawer. Celeste did not find it until later that night. It was a map of the house, drawn in pencil. The front porch was marked with a small yellow circle. Underneath it, Owen had written that they would remember where the light was. For a while, Celeste believed that promise would be enough. It was not. Alistair moved the boys into his estate outside Nashville. He told everyone that he was giving them a better life. But better, in his world, meant controlled. Owen was sent to a private academy that taught him how to speak in rooms full of powerful men. Mateo was placed in a strict boarding school after several angry outbursts. Silas was enrolled in a program designed to make him more polished, more composed, and less emotional. They were not physically abandoned, but they were emotionally managed. Whenever the boys asked about Celeste, Alistair gave them versions of the same story. He suggested that she had moved on. He implied that she had accepted the money the state had provided and chosen not to remain involved. He told them letters had not come because there was nothing to receive. At the same time, Celeste wrote. She wrote on birthdays. She wrote at Christmas. She wrote whenever she heard that a storm had passed through Nashville and wondered whether Silas still feared thunder. She wrote to Owen about home repairs. She wrote to Mateo about the old workshop tools George had left for him. She wrote to all 3 boys about the porch light. The letters never arrived. Mabel Crew made things worse in Pine Hollow. After the court ruling, she wrote a carefully worded article suggesting Celeste had lost the boys because the county had concerns about her care. She never directly accused Celeste of abuse. She did not need to. She used phrases like troubling circumstances and questions about stability. In a small town, vague words could destroy a reputation more effectively than a direct lie. Celeste lost her evening cleaning job at the archive after a board member complained that the county should avoid controversy. Some parents stopped letting their children attend the weekend foster program if Celeste was there. The church pantry, where she had volunteered for years, quietly asked her to take a break. The woman who had opened her home to 3 grieving boys became someone people crossed the street to avoid. Still, every night, She turned on the porch light. Years passed. The roof was repaired one patch at a time. The garden behind the house grew wild, then was cut back, then grew again. The boys became men. Owen learned the business Alistair wanted him to learn, but he never became blind to what power could do. Matteo became a skilled furniture maker and later founded a company that hired young people leaving foster care. Silas, who had once folded paper stars in silence, became a documentary editor. He built stories from old footage, forgotten letters, and details other people missed. They stayed close to one another because they had learned early that brothers were not simply relatives. They were witnesses. As adults, they began asking harder questions about their childhood. Owen remembered the basket of food in Celeste's pantry. Matteo remembered the shelf he had built. Silas remembered the warm circle of porch light reflected in floodwater. None of those memories matched the version of Celeste that Alistair had described. When Alistair died, the brothers inherited more money than they had ever wanted, and more answers than they were prepared to face. Among the documents in his private study was a locked cabinet. The key was found in a sealed envelope addressed to the estate executor. Inside were the letters, dozens of them, some still unopened. There were also notes from Alistair's staff, records showing that correspondence had been intercepted, calls from Celeste had been blocked, and school administrators had been instructed not to share the boys' contact information with her. For 20 years, Alistair had allowed his grandsons to believe the woman who saved them had stopped caring. For 20 years, he had allowed Celeste to believe the boys had forgotten her. The brothers began searching for her immediately. But Pine Hollow had changed. Records were incomplete. Celeste had withdrawn from almost every public part of her life. Her house was still listed under an old family trust in Evelyn Morgan's name. Mabel's old articles falsely suggested Celeste had left town years earlier. Every lead seemed to end in another dead file, another wrong address, another person who remembered her only through rumor. Then, nearly 4 years later, Silas found a hospital billing record connected to an old charity program. It led them back to Pine Hollow. It led them to a foreclosure notice. And it led them to a woman sitting alone in a dark house with one suitcase by the door, believing that the last thing she had left was about to be taken from her, too. Celeste did not recognize them at first. 20 years can change a child's face so completely that memory has to search for smaller things. A way of standing. A habit of looking away when overwhelmed. A hand that turns a ring around a finger whenever anger is trying to rise. She saw Owen first in the oldest man's posture. He still carried his shoulders slightly forward, as if he were ready to shield someone smaller behind him. She saw Matteo in the way the middle brother glanced at the porch bench before looking anywhere else. And she saw Silas when the youngest man raised the battered silver flashlight and held it carefully, not as an object, but as proof that he had carried part of her with him all his life. For a moment, Celeste could not breathe. She had imagined this day so many times that reality felt almost cruel. In some versions, the boys had come back angry. In others, they had come back only long enough to explain why they had stayed away. In the saddest versions, they had never come back at all. Now they were standing in front of her, grown into men she had not been allowed to know. Owen stepped forward first. He did not begin with an excuse. He did not say that time had healed anything. He opened the briefcase and placed the letters on Celeste's kitchen table. Her hands shook when she saw her own handwriting. There were envelopes she remembered licking, closed in the middle of the night. There were stamps she had bought instead of medicine one winter, because she had believed a message from a mother mattered more than comfort. There were letters she had written after cancer treatment, when she could barely hold a pen steady. There were birthday cards for boys who had become men before she was allowed to see them again. She picked up one envelope and stared at it for so long that nobody spoke. Then she looked at Owen. The grief in his face told her everything. The boys had not forgotten. They had been kept from her. The reunion did not become easy, simply because the truth had been found. There were too many missing years, too many birthdays, too many first jobs, graduations, illnesses, heartbreaks, and ordinary afternoons that should have belonged to a family, but had been stolen by pride and silence. Celeste did not rush to fill that space with speeches. She made coffee. It was what she had done whenever someone came into her home carrying pain. They sat around the same kitchen table where Owen had once hidden crackers in his pockets, where Mateo had built his crooked shelf, where Silas had left paper stars beside her mug. The wood was more worn now. The chairs did not match. The room still smelled faintly of coffee, old paint, and the lemon cleaner Celeste had used for decades. Owen told her about the letters. Mateo told her about the years they had spent wondering whether she had chosen to let them go. Silas told her that he had kept the flashlight because it was the only thing from their old life that no one had managed to take from him. Celeste listened. She did not blame them. They had been children when they were taken away. Later, they had been young men trying to survive inside a family that treated obedience like gratitude. They had believed what they were told because children often believe the adults who control the doors around them. But the truth did not erase the damage. Celeste had spent 2 decades asking herself whether she had failed them. She had wondered if Owen had become ashamed of her. She had feared Mateo had turned his anger against the world because she wasn't there to help him carry it. She had imagined Silas losing his voice again, alone in some cold room far from the house where he had first begun to speak. For 20 years, she had lived with a wound that had no explanation. Now the explanation was sitting in front of her in a stack of unopened letters. Owen told her they had not come only to apologize. The bank had scheduled the house for auction because Celeste had fallen behind after years of medical bills, property taxes, and repairs. She had never complained publicly. She had sold what she could, delayed treatment when she should not have, and tried to keep the house because it was the last place in the world where she still felt connected to the boys. Owen had already paid the debt, not as a favor that would leave her feeling indebted, not as a grand gesture for cameras. He had arranged for the home to be protected through a legal trust that Celeste controlled herself. The house would remain hers. The land would remain hers. No company, bank, or relative would ever have the power to take it from her again. Mateo had brought plans to repair the roof, reinforce the foundation, rebuild the porch, and restore the garden. But he had made one thing clear from the beginning. Nothing would be changed without Celeste's approval. They were not there to turn her home into a museum of their guilt. They were there to give her back the security she should have had all along. Silas had something different. He had spent years making documentaries about people who had been overlooked by systems larger than themselves. He knew how to find the truth inside old records, erased histories, and stories that powerful people preferred to keep buried. He had spent months gathering proof of what happened in Pine Hollow. He found the court documents showing that Celeste had never been declared abusive or dangerous. He found the licensing records showing that her only obstacles had been financial and structural, not moral. He found letters from Cassandra Reed praising Celeste's care. He found statements from teachers, George Bell, hospital staff, and neighbors, who remembered the boy's improvement after moving into Celeste's home. Most of all, he found Mabel Crew's old articles. The stories had been carefully written to avoid legal consequences, but their meaning had been obvious. Mabel had turned uncertainty into suspicion, and suspicion into public judgment. Her words had helped isolate Celeste at the moment she needed community most. Mabel was still in Pine Hollow. She had become older, slower, and more respected than she deserved to be. She sat on the community advisory board. She ran local heritage events. People called her a historian, though much of her work had been built on stories she never bothered to verify. Owen, Mateo, and Silas did not want revenge in the way most people imagined revenge. They did not want to humiliate Mabel for entertainment. They did not want to use their money to make her suffer. They wanted the town to face what it had done. And they wanted to create something that would prevent another family from being treated the same way. A week later, Pine Hollow held a public town meeting at the old municipal hall. The official purpose of the meeting was a redevelopment proposal. A private company had offered to buy several older properties near the edge of town, including homes once owned by low-income families. The plan promised new shops, parking spaces, and increased tax revenue. Many residents supported it because the town had struggled for years. Few people knew that Owen had purchased the development company's controlling interest months earlier. Few people knew that Mateo had spent years working with transitional housing programs for young adults, leaving foster care. Few people knew that Silas had prepared a short documentary built from old records, interviews, photographs, and the letters Alistair had hidden. The hall was full that night. Mabel sat near the front in a navy blue jacket, smiling at people who greeted her. She had no idea that the story she once helped bury was about to return. Celeste almost did not go. She had spent so many years avoiding public spaces that the thought of sitting in a crowded room made her chest tighten. She did not want pity. She did not want strangers looking at her with guilty eyes. She did not want her pain turned into a spectacle. But Silas told her, gently and without pressure, that the decision was hers. Celeste thought about the three boys who had once been too afraid to believe they would stay together. She thought about the younger version of herself, standing in a courtroom, while strangers discussed whether love was enough. She thought about every person who had heard a lie about her, and chosen silence, because silence was easier than asking for the truth. So she went. She wore a simple green dress she had owned for years. Owen walked beside her. Mateo carried a folder of documents. Silas held the old flashlight in one hand and a small box of paper stars in the other. The meeting began like every other meeting in Pine Hollow. The mayor spoke about investment. Council members discussed property values. Mabel made notes, as though she had already decided how the story would be told in the next edition of her bulletin. Then Owen stood. He introduced himself not as the head of Vale Holdings, but as a former foster child who had once been told that love could not compete with wealth. He explained that his company would not support the demolition plan. Instead, the Vale brothers were creating the Porch Light Foundation, a fund dedicated to keeping siblings together in foster care, supporting emergency caregivers, helping low-income families meet housing requirements, and giving young people leaving the foster system a safe place to begin again. The fund would provide grants for home repairs, medical support, legal advocacy, school supplies, counseling, and temporary housing. It would also create a local family resource center in Pine Hollow, not in a distant city where people had to drive hours to ask for help. Mateo explained that the old neighborhood would not be demolished. Several homes would be renovated and converted into short-term housing for foster families, grandparents raising grandchildren, and women rebuilding after medical or financial crises. The project would not be named after the Vale family. It would be named after the woman who taught them what home meant. Then Silas stepped forward. The room grew quiet as he placed the old flashlight on the table beside him. He explained that it had belonged to a boy who once believed nobody would come for him. He explained that the woman who carried that boy through floodwater had later been painted as unstable, selfish, and unfit by people who never bothered to learn the truth. The lights dimmed. A screen behind him came alive. For the next 12 minutes, Pine Hollow watched the story it had refused to see. They saw photographs of Celeste's house before the boys arrived. They saw a copy of her emergency caregiver certification. They saw records of Owen's improved school attendance, Mateo's workshop reports, and Silas's first documented words after months of silence. They saw court records showing that Celeste had never been accused of abuse or neglect. They saw excerpts from the letters she had written, each one filled with patience, worry, and love. They saw the false assumptions that had spread through town, repeated so often that many people had mistaken them for fact. And finally, they saw Mabel's own articles. Nobody shouted. Nobody needed to. The silence in the room was heavier than anger. Mabel sat frozen in her chair. For years, she had believed that the harm she caused was small, because she had never put her hands on anyone. She had not taken the boys away. She had not blocked the letters. She had not stood in the courtroom, but she had helped make Celeste alone. She had given people permission to look away. When the film ended, Mabel stood slowly. Her voice shook as she admitted that she had never verified the claims she printed. She had relied on gossip, on assumptions, and on the belief that a poor woman with no powerful family behind her would never have the ability to challenge her. She said that she had told herself she was protecting the community, but the truth was harder. She had enjoyed being the person who decided whose story mattered. Mabel apologized to Celeste in front of the entire town. Celeste did not rush to embrace her. She did not perform forgiveness for the comfort of people who wanted the evening to end neatly. Instead, she told Mabel that an apology was not the same as repair. Truth had to be spoken. Harm had to be acknowledged. Change had to be proven over time. The room listened. For the first time in decades, Celeste was not speaking from a place of shame. She was speaking from dignity. Mabel resigned from the Community Advisory Board the following month. She published a full correction in the Pine Hollow Bulletin, naming the false assumptions and admitting the damage they caused. She donated the profits from her local history books to the Porchlight Foundation. It did not erase the years Celeste lost, but it changed what would happen next. The town began to change in smaller ways too. The church pantry asked Celeste to return, not as a volunteer carrying boxes, but as an advisor for families in crisis. The archive building that once dismissed her offered her access to records for the foundation's work. Teachers who had remained silent when Mabel's rumors spread began supporting a school program for children in temporary housing. George Bell, now old and walking with a cane, came to the Morgan house one afternoon, carrying Mateo's first wooden shelf. He had kept it safe after Celeste lost storage space during treatment. Mateo hung it back in the kitchen himself. Owen repaired the back fence. Mateo rebuilt the porch bench. Silas framed several of the paper stars and placed them along the hallway wall. The house changed, but it did not become unfamiliar. The cracked boards were replaced. The roof no longer leaked. The heating system worked. The garden came back to life. But Celeste insisted that the old porch light remain exactly where it had always been. It was cleaned, repaired, and fitted with a new bulb. But it was still the same light. The first Thanksgiving after the brothers returned, The kitchen was too crowded. Mateo burned the rolls because he was trying to cook and argue with Owen at the same time. Owen complained about the table being too small, even though he had built an extension for it himself. Silas sat quietly for a while, watching them with the soft expression of someone who had waited too long to see a room full of people feel safe. Celeste looked around the table and understood something she had not been able to understand before. She had not failed. She had never failed them. What had happened was not proof that love had been too weak. It was proof that power could be cruel when it valued ownership over care. But even after 20 years of silence, the boys had remembered the truth of what she gave them. Not every detail, not every day, but the feeling. They remembered being wanted. They remembered being safe. They remembered the light. Months later, on another rainy evening, Celeste was sitting on the porch when Cassandra Reed's daughter came up the walkway. Cassandra herself had retired years earlier, but her daughter had followed her into social work. She was not there to ask Celeste to take in another child. Celeste was older now. She had earned the right to rest. Nobody expected her to begin again from nothing. But the young social worker had brought a 12-year-old girl named Ava, who had been moved 3 times in 6 months and was waiting for a temporary place to stay while a kinship arrangement was being reviewed. Ava stood under the porch roof with a duffel bag pressed tightly against her side. She looked at the house the way Owen, Mateo, and Silas had once looked at it. Not with hope. Not yet. With caution. Celeste did not make promises she could not keep. She simply invited Ava inside for a meal. Owen set another chair at the table. Mateo pulled a dry blanket from the closet. Silas showed Ava the paper stars in the hallway and explained, without using too many words, that they had been made by someone who once did not know how to speak. Outside, rain tapped against the porch roof. Inside, the house grew warm. And before the night was over, Celeste walked to the front door and turned on the light. Because family is not only blood. It is not money, property, a last name, or a promise written into a legal document. Family is the person who keeps a place for you when the world has convinced you that you do not belong anywhere. Family is the hand that reaches for you in floodwater. Family is the home that waits without asking whether you deserve to return. And sometimes, after years of darkness, all it takes to find your way back is one porch light that never went out. 3 hours before the Saravan Cultural Council arrived to challenge Arden Museum's ownership, the museum's brightest scholars were losing a battle against a piece of clay.
We cannot let the council see uncertainty.
Then a soaked 17-year-old girl walked into the lobby, carrying a torn backpack and a volunteer application. Her name was Nadia Reyes.
Are you here for the shelter referral program?
Nadia shook her head. She had not come to ask for help. She had seen a flyer and came to apply as a volunteer.
No, I saw a flyer and came to apply as a volunteer.
But when she glanced at the digital scan of the ancient charter, her expression changed. She stepped closer to the screen.
That tablet is upside down.
The scholars turned toward Nadia in disbelief. Dr. Julian Mercer noticed her claim, not with curiosity, but with immediate contempt.
You are saying every scholar in this building has been reading it wrong?
Dr. Mercer asked where exactly she had learned to read a language trained experts had struggled with for years.
And where exactly did you learn what trained experts could not?
Nadia tightened her grip on her backpack. Then she answered that her mother had taught her everything she knew.
My mother taught me.
Then Nadia looked directly at Mercer and said the name he had hoped never to hear again, Elena Reyes.
Elena Reyes.
For the first time that morning, Dr. Julian Mercer looked afraid. The lobby became so quiet that Nadia could hear rain striking the windows. Mercer called Elena a former employee who who had worked briefly as a restoration technician, trying to make Nadia's mother sound insignificant.
Your mother worked here briefly. That is all.
Nadia said the writing was not meant to be read from left to right, and that the marks along the edge were directional guides.
Those marks are not cracks. They tell you where to begin.
Nadia explained that the sentence began at the border and curved inward. Her mother had given that route a name Mercer clearly recognized.
My mother called it the Guardian's Path.
My mother called it the Guardian's Path, Nadia said. The phrase landed heavily. Mercer's expression tightened before he could stop it. The Guardian's Path. It was not a phrase a teenager would have invented. It was not something she could have guessed from a quick glance at the screen. Elena had used those exact words in her notes. They had appeared in the report Mercer had hoped would disappear forever. The junior scholars gathered closer to the monitor. One enlarged the lower border. Another brought up older scans. A third began comparing the marks against a database of known Saravan inscriptions. Their movements became slower and more deliberate. The confidence they had shown before Nadia entered the lobby had begun to dissolve. For weeks, they had been trapped inside one interpretation. They had assumed the tablet was a sale agreement because the museum had always called it one. They had assumed the first line named an owner because every exhibition label, donor brochure, and academic summary said it did. They had not tested the possibility that the first line was being read in reverse. Evelyn Hart noticed the shift. She had been standing near the reception desk moments earlier, balancing a phone call from the board with messages from legal counsel and a growing stack of problems that no one else seemed willing to solve. Evelyn was not a historian. She did not claim to understand ancient languages. Her work was more immediate and less romantic. She managed budgets, staff conflicts, insurance concerns, donors, building permits, public relations disasters, and the 1,000 small emergencies that kept Arden Museum functioning. But she understood risk, and the silence around the research screen was beginning to sound like risk. She ended her call and stepped closer. Her eyes moved from the tablet to Nadia, then from Nadia to Mercer. She asked whether the reading direction had ever been tested, using the border marks as guides. No one answered immediately. That hesitation mattered. Mercer stepped in before the silence became too revealing. He said the team had examined all reasonable possibilities. He reminded Evelyn that the document had been studied by senior experts from several institutions. He warned that a museum facing an international legal challenge could not allow an unverified theory to disrupt months of preparation. He sounded calm, but he was speaking too quickly. Nadia saw it. Owen Blake saw it too. Owen was the security guard who had opened the side entrance for Nadia less than an hour earlier. At first, he had thought she had come inside to get out of the rain. Her jacket was old, her shoes were soaked, and the backpack on her shoulder looked as though it had been repaired more times than most people repaired anything. He had almost sent her away. Now he stood near the edge of the lobby, watching the museum's most respected scholar become unsettled by a phrase from an old notebook. Owen did not know the difference between a trade agreement and a custodial covenant. He did not understand Saravan grammar or ancient border signs, but he knew how people behaved when they were trying to hide fear beneath authority. Nadia continued before Mercer could close the conversation. She explained that the opening symbols did not appear to describe a sale. The grammar was wrong for that. If the border marks were followed, the first sequence became a declaration of protection. The document seemed to describe an object placed into another party's care. It sounded less like ownership and more like responsibility. That difference changed everything. A sale would mean Arden Museum had a legal claim to the relic connected to the charter. A guardianship agreement would mean the museum had only been trusted with it. And if that trust came with conditions, the museum could lose much more than an artifact. It could lose the story it had told the world for generations. The Saravan Cultural Council had spent years arguing exactly that. Their historians believed the relic had never been sold. Their legal advisors believed the museum's claim rested on a mistranslation. Their community had watched as an object tied to their own history, ceremonies, and ancestors became a centerpiece in a foreign institution. The council was not coming to Arden Museum for a polite visit. They were coming to demand answers. Mercer knew that better than anyone. He also knew that if Nadia's interpretation was correct, the charter could become evidence against him. He tried to dismiss her without appearing cruel. He said that ancient texts were filled with ambiguity. He suggested that memories of a parent's research could become distorted over time. He described Nadia's observations as interesting, but incomplete, the kind of thing that should be left to trained professionals. To anyone who did not know him, it might have sounded reasonable, but Nadia heard the message beneath it. You do not belong in this room. You do not understand what you are touching. You should be grateful that we are even listening. For a moment, she felt the old instinct disappear. She had felt it in school when teachers saw the name of the youth shelter on her records. She had felt it at social service offices when adults spoke over her as though she were a problem waiting to be processed. She had felt it at job interviews when people looked at her carefully repaired shoes and decided not to ask another question. Her mother had once told her that poor people were often expected to be grateful just for being allowed inside a room. But Elena had also told her something else. When someone becomes uncomfortable because of a question, that question is usually worth asking. Nadia opened her backpack. Inside was an old leather notebook. The cover had cracked at the corners. Several pages were held together by faded thread. The notebook had traveled with Nadia through every difficult year after her mother died. It had survived moves, shelters, temporary rooms, donated furniture, and nights when Nadia slept with it beneath her pillow because she was afraid someone might take it. To anyone else, it was only a worn book. To Nadia, it was the closest thing she had to hearing her mother's voice again. She opened it carefully. The pages were filled with copied symbols, restoration sketches, arrows, questions, and notes written in Elena Reyes's neat, steady handwriting. Some of the pages showed the Saravan charter from different angles. Others contained close studies of the border marks. One page held a rough drawing of a narrow triangular fragment, its edges covered with small symbols. Near the bottom, Elena had written 3 words. Third fragment missing. Mercer saw the page, and this time his reaction was impossible to miss. His face did not collapse. He did not confess. He did not make the kind of mistake people made in dramatic stories when fear became too large to hide. Instead, he went still. For a man like Mercer, stillness was more revealing than panic. Owen saw it first. Evelyn saw it next. The junior scholars looked from the notebook to Mercer, unsure why a few handwritten words had changed the entire mood of the room. Nadia explained that her mother had always believed the charter was incomplete. The main tablet contained the beginning and central terms of the agreement, but not the final condition. Without that ending, the document could be interpreted in ways that benefited the people holding it. But Elena had believed a third fragment existed, and she had believed it contained the part that mattered most. Mercer dismissed the notebook as private material with no official authority. He said that scattered notes and old sketches could not be treated as evidence. Then he turned toward Owen and instructed him to escort Nadia out of the museum. The command was quiet, direct, and final. It was the kind of order Mercer had given many times before. Most people obeyed him because they knew what happened when they did not. Careers could stall, invitations could disappear, research funding could dry up. A single bad impression from the head of a department could follow a person for years. But Owen did not move. He had spent most of his working life following instructions. Security work taught people to respect procedure. You checked badges, you followed the chain of command, you kept order. You did not insert yourself into conversations that belonged to people with more education, more money, or more authority. But as Owen looked at Nadia holding her mother's notebook, he understood that this was not about procedure. It was about whether someone with less power deserved to be heard. "I think we should verify her claim first," he said. The sentence was simple, but it changed the room. Mercer turned toward him with open irritation. A security guard was not supposed to interrupt an academic dispute. He was supposed to stand near the door and remain invisible. Owen did not look away. Evelyn made the decision before Mercer could respond. She said Nadia would stay. No one would remove her from the building. No documents connected to Elena Reyes would be taken out of the museum. And no final presentation would be given to the Cerevan Council until the old research records had been reviewed. Mercer tried to protest. Evelyn stopped him. She took the notebook from Nadia and studied the sketch of the triangular fragment. The shape appeared to fit along the lower edge of the Cerevan Charter. Elena's handwriting was old, but the detail was precise. This was not the careless scribbling of someone guessing at a mystery. It was the work of a person who had spent long hours looking at something everyone else had ignored. Then another folded page slipped from the notebook. It fell onto the marble floor. Owen bent down and picked it up. The paper had yellowed with age. Most of it had been torn away, leaving only the bottom section intact. But that was enough. At the lower edge was a red administrative note. Further review suspended pending departmental authorization. Below it was a signature, Dr. Julian Mercer. Owen handed the page to Evelyn. She read it once, then again. Mercer said the report had been preliminary. He said Elena had raised questions that could not be proven at the time. He said the department had been under pressure. The evidence had been incomplete, and the suspension had been a normal professional decision. But his explanation did not answer the real question. Why had the review been suspended instead of completed? Why had the final pages gone missing? Why had the museum continued to present the charter as proof of ownership after one of its own researchers raised doubts? And why had Mercer reacted with fear when Nadia mentioned the third fragment? Evelyn looked at the old note in her hand. Then she asked Owen to take Nadia to the archive room beneath the museum. The archive was not part of the public Arden Museum. Visitors saw marble floors, bright galleries, climate-controlled display cases, and carefully chosen labels. The archive was where the less polished history lived. It sat below the galleries behind gray doors and narrow corridors. Metal shelves held old photographs, personnel files, maintenance records, restoration logs, rejected reports, and documents that had not been touched in years. It smelled of dust, paper, cardboard, and cold metal. For Nadia, it felt strangely familiar. Her mother had once worked in rooms like that. Not under gallery lights, not beside wealthy donors. In spaces where people handled broken objects, sorted fragments, and tried to restore what time had damaged. Owen switched on the lights. Rows of shelves stretched ahead of them. At first, Nadia found only small traces of Elena. Her name appeared in old staff rosters, payroll forms, inventory lists, and repair schedules. She was described as a technician, an assistant, a support employee. Never a researcher. Never a contributor. Never someone who had asked questions important enough to threaten the museum's official story. The absence hurt more than Nadia expected. It was one thing to know that her mother had been dismissed. It was another to see how completely her work had been erased. Owen searched through boxes marked with old project names. Nadia moved slowly between cabinets, checking dates and labels. The Saravan Charter had been studied in several phases over the years. The museum had recorded every restoration material, every temperature change, every crack, every photograph. Yet somehow, the final fragment had vanished from the story. Then Nadia found a photograph. It had been taken during an excavation exhibit opening 12 years earlier. Dr. Mercer stood near the center, younger but instantly recognizable, smiling beside donors, visiting scholars, and senior museum officials. Near the edge of the picture, almost cut off by the frame, stood Elena Reyes. She was holding a padded tray. On the tray were several clay fragments. One of them was narrow and triangular. Nadia placed the photograph beside the sketch from her mother's notebook. The shapes matched. The third fragment had existed. It had been found with the charter, and at some point, it had been removed from the official record. Owen searched another shelf and found a large storage box labeled Saravan Restoration Project, 2014 to 2016. Inside were folders of condition reports, photographs, correspondence, and maintenance forms. Several gaps appeared where files should have been. Empty spaces between folders suggested that someone had removed documents long ago. But at the bottom of the box, beneath a stack of old storage logs, Owen found an envelope. Elena Reyes's handwriting covered the front. Nadia stared at it for several seconds before touching it. The envelope had survived 12 years in the museum's basement. It had survived staff changes, renovations, storage moves, and whatever effort had been made to erase Elena's work. Somehow, it had remained hidden among files no one thought important enough to destroy. Inside was a partial report. The first page carried Elena's name. The second page described the same border marks Nadia had identified in the lobby. The third page argued that the charter might be a custodial agreement rather than a transfer of ownership. The fourth page mentioned a detached fragment that could contain the final condition of the covenant. And at the bottom, in the same red ink, was the same instruction. Further review suspended. Nadia read the pages again and again. The words were not dramatic. Elena had not written with anger. She had written carefully, professionally, and with the restraint of someone who knew that evidence mattered more than emotion. But between the lines, Nadia could see her mother's loneliness. Elena had been right. She had known something was wrong. She had tried to tell people with the authority to investigate, and someone had made sure the investigation stopped. Nadia thought about the last years of her mother's life. After losing her job at Arden Museum, Elena had taken whatever work she could find. She restored damaged books for a small shop across town. She cleaned offices at night. She repaired old furniture. She translated simple letters and labels for community groups. She never returned to academic conferences. She never received another museum position. She became quieter, more tired, and more careful about what she said. But she never stopped studying. Some nights, Nadia would wake up and see light beneath the kitchen door. Her mother would be sitting at the table with a cup of cold tea, copying symbols into the leather notebook. She had never spoken much about Mercer. She had never explained exactly why she had been forced out. But once, when Nadia was still young, she had asked why her mother kept working on something that had already caused so much pain. Elena had looked up from the page and said, "The truth does not stop being true, just because powerful people are tired of hearing it." Nadia had been too young to understand. Standing in the archive room with the report in her hands, she understood at last. Evelyn arrived a few minutes later. She had been trying to keep the museum from falling apart upstairs. The Saravan Council's cars had already been seen outside. Board members were gathering in the reception hall. The legal team had asked for an update. Donors were beginning to notice that the scheduled presentation had been delayed. But when Evelyn read Elena's report, the urgent noise of the building seemed to fade. She read it once as an administrator looking for liability. Then she read it again as a person trying to understand how an institution had allowed one woman's work to disappear. The report was not reckless. It was not speculative in the careless sense Mercer had claimed. Elena had documented her observations. She had included comparative references. She had outlined what needed to be tested. She had not demanded that the museum surrender the relic immediately. She had simply asked for the truth to be examined. Evelyn looked at Nadia. For the first time that day, Nadia was no longer an unwanted visitor, a shelter girl, or an inconvenience at the worst possible moment. She was the only person in the building carrying evidence everyone else had ignored. A message came through Evelyn's phone. The Saravan Cultural Council had arrived, and somewhere inside Arden Museum, hidden beneath a false label or a forgotten display case, was the missing fragment that could expose everything Julian Mercer had spent 12 years trying to bury. The Saravan Cultural Council entered Arden Museum without anger, spectacle, or raised voices. They did not need any of those things. Their presence alone unsettled the building. The delegation included historians, preservation specialists, legal advisors, and Professor Layla Rahman, one of the most respected scholars of ancient Saravan language and law. They had traveled for years through archives, private collections, old shipping documents, and the scattered records of expeditions that had removed objects from their homeland. For generations, people from Saravan had watched museums around the world display pieces of their culture. Sacred objects had been taken from temples, burial sites, family archives, and ceremonial grounds. They had been transported across oceans, assigned new catalog numbers, placed beneath foreign lighting, and described in languages their creators would never have recognized. The world often called that preservation, but preservation without consent could become another form of theft. The Saravan Council had come to Arden Museum because the charter mattered. It was not only a tablet, it was the legal memory of an agreement made during a time of violence and uncertainty. The relic connected to it had been treated as a trophy by the museum, but to the Saravan people, it was something else entirely. It represented continuity. It represented survival. It represented a promise made by their ancestors that no institution had the right to rewrite. Dr. Mercer greeted the delegation in the reception hall with the calm professionalism that had made him famous. His voice was smooth. His posture was controlled. He intended to lead them into the presentation room, show them the museum's official interpretation, and reassure the board that everything remained under control. But Evelyn interrupted before the briefing could begin. She informed the council that new archival material had been discovered and that the museum could not ethically present a final translation until the evidence had been reviewed. Mercer's frustration appeared only briefly. To most people, he still looked composed. But Layla Rahman noticed. She had spent decades working with scholars, collectors, politicians, and museum leaders. She knew the difference between uncertainty and concealment. She knew when a person was trying to protect truth and when a person was trying to protect a reputation. Then she saw the old leather notebook in Nadia's hands. Layla stopped walking. Her eyes moved to the cracked cover, then to the faint handwriting visible on the open page. For a moment, her expression changed from professional caution to something more personal. "Elena Reyes," she said quietly. I knew her name. Nadia looked up. The room seemed to narrow around those words. Years earlier, before Elena had been forced out of Arden Museum, she had contacted Professor Layla Rahman. Elena had asked questions about the structure of old Saravan custodial agreements. She had sent a short letter describing the border marks on the charter. Layla had replied with several sources and asked for more photographs. Then the correspondence stopped. Layla had never known why. She had assumed Elena had been discouraged. She had assumed the museum had chosen a different direction. She had assumed, as people often assumed when someone disappeared quietly from an institution, that the person must have made a mistake. Now, seeing Nadia, the notebook, and the partial report, Layla understood what had really happened. Elena had been silenced. Nadia showed her the report from the archive, the old photograph, and the sketch of the triangular fragment. Layla examined them carefully. She did not rush to make a grand claim. She asked questions. She compared dates. She looked at the handwriting. She studied the directional markings drawn by Elena beside the tablet. Then she said that the evidence deserved to be taken seriously. That was enough. For the first time, Mercer was no longer controlling the conversation. Nadia remembered another detail from the notebook. The sketch of the missing fragment had been drawn beside a rough outline of the museum's upper gallery. Her mother had written a short sentence beneath it, one Nadia had never fully understood. The final promise was moved where no one would think to read it. Nadia thought of the photograph she had found in the archive. Behind Elena and Mercer, almost hidden by the group of donors, had been a familiar display case. It stood in the upper gallery beside a bronze ceremonial mask. Nadia remembered seeing it years ago when her mother had once brought her to the museum before everything changed. The clue had been there all along. The group moved toward the upper gallery. Mercer tried to stop them without seeming like he was stopping them. He argued that the museum should follow established procedure. He said the council should not be drawn into an internal archival disagreement. He suggested that the search for a missing fragment could take days, perhaps weeks, and that it would be irresponsible to make conclusions before the proper team had examined every record. But his argument only made Evelyn more certain. A man who believed the fragment did not matter would not be trying so hard to delay the search. The upper gallery was quieter than the rest of the museum. Most visitors had been redirected because of the unexpected meeting. Rain darkened the tall windows, turning the city outside into a blurred gray landscape. The bronze ceremonial mask sat behind glass at the center of the room, its surface reflecting faint gold light. Beside it was a small display case containing several fragments that had been labeled as decorative objects of uncertain origin. One of them was triangular. It was smaller than Nadia expected, smaller than the fear it had caused, smaller than the years of silence built around it. It rested on dark velvet beneath a short museum label that made it sound meaningless. Decorative clay fragment, origin uncertain. Nadia stood before the glass and felt something cold move through her chest. For 12 years, the truth had been sitting in plain sight. Visitors had walked past it. Scholars had walked past it. Donors had walked past it. Mercer had walked past it every day, knowing exactly what it was. The conservator carefully opened the case. The fragment was removed and placed beside a high-resolution image of the Saravan Charter. The shape aligned with the lower border. The clay composition looked similar. The small directional marks along one edge matched the signs Nadia had identified on the main tablet. Professor Layla leaned closer. Then she looked at Nadia. "It fits," she said. The words carried through the gallery. Mercer immediately tried to dismiss the discovery. He said that fragments could be misleading. He said that similar clay did not establish legal meaning. He said that objects from the same region could resemble each other without belonging together. But Evelyn had already requested the old catalog records. A staff member arrived with digital copies from the museum database. The history of the triangular fragment appeared on the screen. Years earlier, it had been listed as part of the Saravan Restoration Project. Then, 11 years before, its catalog number had been changed. Its link to the charter had been removed. Its classification had been rewritten. Instead of a missing section of a legal tablet, it had become a decorative fragment of uncertain origin. The authorization belonged to Dr. Julian Mercer. This time, no explanation could make the fact disappear. The fragment was taken to the research wing under the supervision of the conservator, Layla, Evelyn, and members of the Saravan Council. The charter was brought from its secure case and placed beneath specialized imaging equipment. Scholars gathered around the monitors. Lawyers stood near the doorway. Board members arrived quietly, their faces pale as they realized the museum's crisis was no longer private. Nadia stood at the edge of the room with her mother's notebook held against her chest. The same people who had ignored her in the lobby were now waiting for the evidence she had led them to reveal itself. At first, the scan showed only dark clay, scratches, and the cloudy residue of an old protective coating. The conservator adjusted the lighting frequency. The image sharpened slowly. A faint line appeared, then another. Then a sequence of symbols emerged beneath the surface, running along the narrow edge of the fragment. The room became completely still. The missing ending had been found. Professor Layla did not translate immediately. She examined the image with care. She compared the symbols to the border marks on the main charter. She followed the Guardian's path Nadia had identified. She corrected the orientation. She checked the grammar against old Saravan legal forms. It was not a miracle. It was evidence finally being allowed to speak. The charter did not describe the sacred relic as something purchased. It did not grant permanent ownership to anyone outside the Saravan community. It described the relic as an entrusted object, placed in the care of guardians during a period of danger. Those guardians had a duty to preserve it. They had a duty to protect it. And when recognized representatives of the Saravan people came forward to request its return, the agreement required the guardians to give it back. Then Layla reached the final sentence. Her voice softened as she translated the last words. The guardian who conceals this covenant, alters its meaning, or refuses the rightful return, forfeits all claim to hold what was never theirs. The words settled over the room like a verdict. The Arden Museum had never owned the relic. It had only been trusted with it, and its right to hold it had ended the moment it chose secrecy over truth. No one spoke for several seconds. The members of the Saravan Council stood quietly before the monitor. Their faces carried emotions that did not need explanation. Some looked angry. Some looked exhausted. One older historian closed his eyes, as though he had spent years waiting for the chance to hear those words spoken aloud. For them, the translation was not only a legal victory, it was proof that their ancestors had not been forgotten. The agreement had survived. The language had survived. The truth had survived, even after generations of people tried to bury it beneath labels, glass cases, and institutional certainty. Nadia looked toward Mercer. She remembered how he had looked at her when she first entered the lobby. He had seen a wet jacket, worn shoes, a torn backpack, and a girl from a shelter. He had assumed that was enough information to decide whether she mattered. He had thought he could dismiss her with polished words. He had thought Elena's name had been erased. He had thought the fragment was hidden safely behind a false label. But now the entire room was looking at him. Evelyn stepped forward with Elena's report in her hands. "Dr. Mercer, you are suspended pending an independent investigation." Mercer tried to argue that the museum could not make such a decision based on a single translation. He claimed that the council was interpreting incomplete evidence. He insisted that catalog changes could have administrative explanations. He tried to make the truth sound complicated again, because complication had protected him for years. But the evidence was no longer a single translation. It was 12 years of hidden reports. It was altered catalog records. It was a missing fragment reclassified under his authorization. It was Elena's research. It was Nadia's notebook. It was the fear on his face every time someone came too close to what he had done. No one came to defend him. The scholars who had once treated him as untouchable stood in silence. The board members avoided his eyes. The legal team began collecting documents. The Saravan Council watched with the calm dignity of people who had waited too long for the truth to be acknowledged. Mercer's career did not collapse because he lacked intelligence. It collapsed because he believed intelligence gave him the right to decide which truths mattered. He had silenced Elena because she had less power than he did. He had buried her work because it threatened his reputation. He had hidden the fragment because it threatened the museum's claim. And he had dismissed Nadia because he believed a girl from a shelter could never challenge a man with titles, money, and influence. But the truth had returned through the daughter of the woman he tried to erase. The investigation that followed was larger than anyone expected. Arden Museum announced a complete independent review of the Saravan collection. The sacred relic was removed from public display and placed under joint care, while arrangements were made for its return. The museum agreed to work with the Saravan Cultural Council to review every artifact connected to the original expedition. More documents were found in the weeks that followed. There were internal emails showing that Mercer had discouraged staff from revisiting Elena's work. There were catalog revisions with no proper explanation. There were notes from meetings where concerns about ownership had been minimized because donors had invested heavily in the Saravan exhibit. Mercer had not acted alone in every decision, but he had been the person with the power to make silence look official. His suspension became permanent. His academic appointments were reviewed. His published work was questioned. The museum removed his name from several public materials while the investigation continued. The punishment was not dramatic in the way people expected from stories. There was no public shouting. No one dragged him through the lobby. No one needed to. The truth did something more lasting. It took away the authority he had used to control others. The museum issued a public correction. Elena Reyes's name was restored to the official history of the Saravan Charter. Her report was digitized, preserved, and acknowledged as the first internal research to identify the document as a custodial covenant rather than a transfer of ownership. For years, her work had existed only in a worn notebook and a hidden envelope. Now it became part of the record. A research grant was created in Elena Reyes's name for young people from underrepresented communities who wanted to study history, languages, preservation, archaeology, and cultural heritage. The museum's board did not create the grant because it could erase the past. Nothing could do that. They created it because the future had to become different. Nadia did not become rich overnight. She did not suddenly appear on magazine covers or receive a perfect new life from strangers who had ignored her before. That would not have been honest. Her problems did not disappear, because one day changed everything. But the day did change the direction of her life. She received a paid internship with the joint Sarivan-Arden Preservation Project. The position came with transportation support, educational guidance, and stable housing assistance through a youth transition program. For the first time in a long time, Nadia had a place to go that did not feel temporary. She also had a future that did not depend on someone else deciding she belonged. Professor Layla became one of her mentors. She did not treat Nadia as a miracle or a symbol. She treated her as a young person with knowledge, patience, and a deep connection to the work her mother had begun. She taught Nadia how to verify evidence, how to question assumptions, and how to let facts speak louder than anger. Nadia listened carefully, but she never forgot the lesson she had already learned from Elena. Sometimes the most important thing a person can do is refuse to let the truth become invisible. Months later, Nadia returned to the archive room beneath Arden Museum. The room still smelled of dust, paper, and old metal shelves, but it no longer felt like a place where forgotten stories were buried. A new workstation had been set up near the window. There were digitization tools, preservation folders, and neatly labeled boxes waiting to be cataloged. Nadia entered with her own identification badge. This time, she did not come through the side door hoping someone would let her stay. She belonged there. On her desk sat her mother's old leather notebook beside a new archival folder. The label read, Elena Reyes Collection. Nadia opened the notebook to the first page. There, in faded handwriting, was a sentence her mother had written years before. The truth is often hidden in the part everyone else ignores. For years, Nadia had thought those words were only about old symbols and forgotten documents. Now she understood that they were about people too. They were about the quiet worker no one bothered to credit. They were about the poor girl no one thought was worth listening to. They were about the community whose history had been carried away and renamed by strangers. They were about the small fragment everyone walked past because they had already decided it could not matter. The world often judges people by clothes, titles, money, addresses, and appearances. But wisdom does not always arrive wearing the shape people expect. Sometimes it comes carrying a torn backpack. Sometimes it stands quietly in the rain. And sometimes, the person everyone overlooks is the one carrying the truth that changes everything. Flight 718 entered the storm.
Captain's down! I need help!
Lightning tore across the cabin.
Everyone stay seated.
Then the captain collapsed.
Captain, stay with me!
All 186 lives held still.
Can anyone here fly this aircraft?
From seat 34B, Maya stood.
I can help.
She had no uniform or badge, only an old leather bag and a name the airline feared.
He said she could not fly.
She was fired for a reason.
3 years earlier, Maya wore captain's stripes.
Sign the report, then walk away.
It started with one missing number.
The records don't match.
But to understand why Graham Voss was more afraid of Maya Reed than of the storm outside, we have to go back 3 years. To the morning she first noticed a single missing number in an aircraft maintenance record. At the time, Maya still wore the Aurora Skies uniform with pride. She had earned every stripe on it the difficult way. There had been no family money paying for flight hours, no powerful relatives opening doors, and no easy path from the neighborhood where she grew up to the left seat of a commercial aircraft. Her father, Daniel Reed, had spent most of his life working beneath airplanes rather than inside them. He was an avionics technician, one of those men passengers never saw, but depended on every time a plane rose above the clouds. Daniel had taught Maya that aircraft did not become dangerous all at once. A disaster rarely began with fire, smoke, or a screaming alarm. More often, it began with one small shortcut that nobody wanted to question. A number entered incorrectly. A warning cleared too quickly. A part marked as replaced when it had only been reset. A supervisor deciding that a delay would cost more than a risk. When Maya was a little girl, she used to sit beside him in the garage while he repaired radios, test panels, and old electrical equipment from the hangar. He would place a wiring diagram in front of her and explain that every line had a purpose. Even the smallest connection mattered, because machines did not care whether people were tired, impatient, rich, or powerful. A system either worked properly or it did not. Those lessons stayed with Maya long after she became a pilot. She was never the loudest captain at Aurora Skies. She did not enjoy drawing attention to herself. She did not try to impress crews by acting fearless. What made her respected was the fact that she prepared more carefully than anyone expected. She studied weather patterns before every flight. She read maintenance notes instead of skipping past them. She listened to ground crews. She checked again when something did not make sense. That habit had saved passengers from minor trouble more than once. A faulty cargo warning, an incorrect fuel figure, a hydraulic message that turned out to be nothing serious. Most people in the company saw those delays as inconveniences. Maya saw them as proof that carefulness was not paranoia. Then came Flight 216 from Dallas to Phoenix. It was an ordinary overnight route. The passengers were tired. The cabin crew wanted an on-time departure. The weather was clear, and the aircraft had already been delayed once because of a late inbound connection. It should have been a simple flight, the kind people forgot the moment they landed. But while reviewing the maintenance log, Maya noticed that an electrical distribution unit had been marked as replaced during the previous week. The entry looked complete at first glance. The date was there. The technician's name was there. The maintenance release was signed. Only one thing was missing: the serial number of the replacement unit. For most people, it would have meant nothing. A missing number in a long page of technical records could easily be a clerical mistake. But Maya knew that components like that were tracked for a reason. A part's serial number told the company where it came from, how old it was, what service history it carried, and whether it had been connected to previous incidents. She asked the ground maintenance team to verify the record. The technician checked the paperwork, then checked again. He looked uncomfortable. He told Maya the part had been inspected and the aircraft was safe to fly. Maya did not accuse him of lying. She did not raise her voice. She simply asked to see the replacement documentation. It was not available. She asked for the maintenance supervisor. The supervisor arrived irritated, already aware that passengers were waiting at the gate. He explained that the component had been dealt with, that the issue was minor, and that the aircraft had completed several flights since then without any problems. Maya understood the pressure. Every minute on the ground cost the airline money. Every delay created complaints. Every cancellation turned into a report that climbed upward through management. But an aircraft was not safer because it had been lucky. She refused to sign the release until the records were verified. The flight was delayed. Passengers complained. Gate agents apologized. The company's operations center called repeatedly. By the time the documents finally arrived, The problem had been explained away as a simple database error. The part had supposedly been replaced correctly, and the missing number had supposedly been omitted during a system transfer. Maya allowed the flight to continue only after the aircraft passed a more detailed inspection. It landed safely in Phoenix. But Maya could not forget the feeling she had when she looked at that incomplete record. Over the next several months, she started noticing similar inconsistencies across Aurora Skies' older fleet. A repeated electrical warning that disappeared after a reset. A maintenance sign-off completed at a time when the technician had been assigned to another airport. Components marked as replaced without a matching inventory transfer. Aircraft that seemed to suffer the same minor problems again and again, but never long enough to trigger a formal grounding. At first, Maya believed the airline had a paperwork problem. Then she began to suspect that it had a safety problem. The more she looked, the more patterns appeared. The aircraft involved were not random. Many belonged to the same group of older planes that had been modified during a cost-cutting program. Several had used components supplied by a contractor called Horizon Avionics Solutions. The company had been praised publicly for helping Aurora Skies reduce maintenance expenses and improve turnaround time. But Daniel Reed had once warned Maya about companies that made their profits by promising that expensive problems could disappear cheaply. He had told her that the cheapest part was often the most expensive one in the long run. Maya compiled everything she found into a formal safety report. She was careful. She did not write with anger. She did not make accusations she could not prove. She listed the aircraft numbers, the dates, the recurring warnings, the incomplete records, and the supplier details. Then she requested an independent audit. For 2 weeks, no one responded. At first, she assumed the report had been lost in the system. Then she received an invitation to a private meeting with Aurora Skies management. That was where she met Graham Voss for the first time. Back then, Voss was not yet the chief executive officer. He was the airline's chief operations strategist, a title that sounded technical enough to be trusted and vague enough to hide the power behind it. He was known for saving money without appearing cruel. He had a talent for making difficult decisions sound reasonable. Investors liked him because profits rose wherever he went. Executives liked him because he never created public scandals. Employees feared him because people who crossed him often found themselves quietly removed from the path ahead. Maya entered the meeting room believing someone had finally taken her concerns seriously. Voss greeted her warmly. He praised her flight record. He spoke about her discipline, her professionalism, and the fact that Aurora Skies needed pilots who cared deeply about safety. Then the tone shifted. He suggested that Maya had become too emotionally invested in technical details outside her direct area of responsibility. He explained that maintenance teams had already reviewed the issue. He reminded her that pilots and engineers needed to trust one another. He implied that her persistence was creating tension inside the company. Nothing he said sounded openly threatening. That was what made it dangerous. By the end of the meeting, Maya realized that Voss was not trying to understand her report. He was trying to make her doubt it. He wanted her to believe that asking questions had made her difficult. He wanted her to believe that being careful had made her disruptive. He wanted her to feel ashamed for caring more about the truth than the company's image. Maya left the meeting unsettled, but she did not withdraw the report. Instead, she filed a second one. That was when Aurora Skies stopped treating her as an employee and began treating her as a problem. Within weeks, Maya was removed from active flight duty pending an internal review. No one explained what the review involved. No one gave her a clear timeline. She was asked to attend meetings, where people spoke around the issue without ever addressing it directly. Her supervisors became distant. Colleagues who once trusted her stopped returning messages. Then the rumors began. Anonymous sources told aviation websites that a captain at Aurora Skies had repeatedly caused delays by overreacting to minor maintenance concerns. Industry forums began discussing an unnamed pilot who had supposedly clashed with ground crews. A columnist wrote about the danger of allowing personal anxiety to influence professional judgment. Maya's name was not mentioned at first. It did not need to be. Inside the airline, everyone knew who the story was about. Months later, when Aurora Skies finally released its decision, the company did not accuse Maya of misconduct. They did not claim she had broken any regulation. They did not say she was unqualified. They used softer words. They stated that her employment had ended because of concerns about professional collaboration and operational judgment. It was enough. Her licenses remained valid. Her training record remained strong. But no major airline wanted to hire a pilot whose former company had quietly labeled her a risk. Maya appealed. She requested access to the maintenance records that had prompted her report. She contacted regulators. She spoke to lawyers. But every path seemed to lead back to the same invisible wall. The airline insisted that its fleet was safe. The records she requested were delayed, restricted, or declared confidential. Her report was marked as unsubstantiated. The company moved on, and so did everyone else, except Maya. She did not stop believing that something was wrong. She simply ran out of people willing to listen. The hardest part was not losing the uniform. It was losing the future she had spent her entire life building. For years, she had imagined the first day she would become a captain. She had imagined the weight of the jacket on her shoulders, the sound of her name spoken over the cabin speakers, and the quiet pride on her father's face when he saw her standing beside an aircraft. Daniel Reed had lived long enough to see her earn that title, but he did not live long enough to see what Aurora Skies did to her. He had died a year before Maya filed the report, leaving behind a small metal case filled with old notes, component numbers, supplier records, and handwritten observations from his own years in aviation. At the time, Maya had thought of it only as a piece of him she could not bear to throw away. She carried that case everywhere, not because she believed it contained the answer to anything, but because it reminded her that someone had once taught her not to look away when the truth became inconvenient. After Aurora Skies pushed her out, Maya took whatever work she could find. She taught emergency procedures at a simulator center outside the city. She trained student pilots who dreamed of flying for airlines one day. She showed them how to handle engine failures, severe weather, rapid descents, and instrument malfunctions. At night, after the students went home, Maya sometimes stayed behind. She would sit alone in the simulator, surrounded by artificial screens and plastic controls, looking at a runway that was not real and listening to a wind that did not exist. She still knew every procedure. She still remembered every call-out. She still dreamed about flying. But she no longer believed the industry would ever allow her back into a real cockpit. That was why she had booked the cheapest seat she could find on Aurora Skies Flight 718. She was traveling to an interview for a small training position in another state. The job did not offer prestige. It did not offer a captain's salary. It did not even guarantee that she would ever fly a real aircraft again. But it offered something she had almost stopped expecting: a reason to stay close to the sky. She had boarded the flight quietly, kept her head down, and chosen seat 34B near the back. She had no idea Graham Voss would be sitting in first class. She had no idea Captain Luis Herrera would collapse. She had no idea that the aircraft would enter a storm, carrying the exact kind of danger she had tried to expose. But when the cabin lights flickered and the first warning chime sounded, Maya felt something old awaken inside her. Not panic. Recognition. The sound was wrong. The pattern was wrong. And when Nora Bell asked if anyone on board knew how to fly, Maya had understood that remaining silent would be the same as helping the lie survive. So she stood. Now, as Nora guided her toward the cockpit, Maya could feel the eyes of the passengers following her. Some looked hopeful. Some looked afraid. A few looked at her with the same suspicion Graham Voss had planted in the cabin only moments earlier. But Maya did not look back. She had spent 3 years trying to prove that she belonged in the sky. This time, she did not need anyone's permission. The cockpit door opened. The air inside was cold and sharp. Rain hammered against the windshield. Captain Herrera lay unconscious in the left seat, while 2 passengers with medical training worked beside him. Evan Cole, the first officer, was gripping the controls with both hands, trying to manage the aircraft, the weather, the warning systems, and his own fear all at once. Maya stepped forward. Then she looked at the maintenance display. For 1 second, everything inside her went still. The aircraft registration number glowing on the screen was one she knew. It belonged to one of the exact planes listed in the report Aurora Skies had buried 3 years earlier. And suddenly, Maya understood that the storm was not the only thing trying to bring Flight 718 down. The moment the cockpit door closed behind Maya Reed, the storm stopped being something she could watch from a passenger window. It became a living force that pressed against every surface around her. Rain struck the windshield in violent sheets. Lightning turned the cockpit white for half a second at a time. Warning tones rose and disappeared beneath the growl of the engines, while the aircraft shuddered through air that no longer felt stable. Captain Luis Herrera sat motionless in the left seat, his eyes closed, his body held in place by the harness. He had collapsed only minutes earlier, leaving Evan Cole, the young first officer, alone with a medical emergency, severe weather, and a panel of instruments that seemed to be losing faith in themselves one screen at a time. Evan did not look like the kind of pilot who had ever imagined failure. He was trained, polished, and careful. He had spent years learning procedures, memorizing limitations, and proving that he belonged in the right seat of a commercial jet. But training had a way of becoming something very different. When the cockpit was dark, the captain was unconscious, and 186 lives were sitting behind a locked door. Maya understood that fear. She had known it long before Aurora Skies had taken her uniform, her cockpit, and the career she had once believed would define her life. Fear was not always loud. Sometimes it sat quietly in the room, hiding behind a steady voice and a professional posture, waiting for one small failure to become another. She did not begin by trying to take control of everything. That would have been useless. Evan was still flying the aircraft. The engines were still running. The airplane still had a path through the storm, even if that path was narrowing by the second. What Evan needed was not someone to make him feel smaller. He needed someone who could separate the emergency into pieces small enough to survive. Maya told him to stay with the essentials: airspeed, altitude, direction. Nothing else mattered until those things were secure. The rest of the cockpit could flash, chime, and threaten all it wanted. Panic would come from trying to solve every problem at once. Survival would come from handling the next problem first. For a few seconds, Evan's breathing slowed. His hands remained tight around the controls, but they stopped moving with the helpless urgency of someone searching for a miracle. Maya watched him settle into the rhythm of the work. He was still frightened. He was still young, but he was listening. Outside the cockpit, Nora Bell moved through the cabin with the kind of calm that could only come from someone who understood how much people needed to borrow courage from another person. She did not promise the passengers that everything would be fine. Promises were dangerous at 37,000 feet. Instead, she gave them instructions, routines, and the steady presence of someone who refused to let fear become contagious. Most of the passengers did not know exactly what had happened. They only knew that the captain had stopped speaking. The lights had flickered, and the storm outside looked less like weather and more like a wall. Some held hands with strangers. Some stared at the ceiling as if the aircraft might answer their questions. Some prayed in silence. And in first class, Graham Voss sat surrounded by comfort that suddenly meant nothing. Voss had spent his life believing that every crisis could be controlled by the right person in the right room. He knew how to make nervous investors feel confident. He knew how to turn bad press into reassuring language. He knew how to bury a problem beneath legal statements and polished smiles. But the cockpit of Flight 718 was not a boardroom. It did not care who owned the company, who had influence, or who could afford the best attorneys. The storm did not recognize titles, and for the first time in years, Graham Voss was trapped in a place where the woman he had tried to erase was more valuable than he was. Maya studied the flickering displays, while Evan followed the emergency procedures. A navigation screen went dark, returned, then began showing incomplete information. One electrical warning appeared and disappeared. Another followed. The failures were not dramatic enough to look like a total collapse, but they were too strange to ignore. They came in bursts, almost as if the aircraft were trying to tell them something and could not decide whether it had the strength to keep speaking. Then Maya saw the aircraft registration number on a small maintenance screen. For one moment, the storm disappeared from her mind. She knew that aircraft, not because she had flown it often, but because she had seen its records before. 3 years earlier, when she had still worn Aurora Sky's captain's stripes, she had found a missing number in a maintenance report tied to an electrical replacement. At the time, it had looked like a small inconsistency, a missing serial number, a skipped verification line, a document that seemed to have been cleaned too carefully. But Maya had learned from her father that the smallest missing detail could carry the largest warning. Daniel Reed had worked around aircraft systems for most of his life. He was not famous. He did not have a high-ranking office or a seat in executive meetings. He was simply the kind of technician who noticed what other people ignored. He noticed when parts were listed as new, but carried the wear of older units. He noticed when records were signed too quickly. He noticed when aircraft behaved differently after rain, after heavy electrical demand, or after long hours in difficult weather. He had never believed that danger announced itself loudly. Most danger, he used to say, began as something people found convenient to overlook. Maya had carried that lesson with her into every cockpit she had ever entered. And now, as she watched the displays flicker on Flight 718, she understood something that made her chest tighten. The storm had not created the problem. The storm had forced it into the open. She asked Nora to bring the worn leather bag from her seat in row 34B. Nora did not ask why. She had seen enough in Maya's face to understand that this was not a request made out of fear. It was a request made because Maya had found a thread, and she intended to follow it. While Nora made her way through the cabin, Evan reported the aircraft's status to air traffic control. He declared the medical emergency. He reported the electrical failures. He requested priority handling. His voice was still strained, but it had changed. It no longer sounded like someone waiting to be rescued. It sounded like someone beginning to believe he might be able to help rescue others. Then Aurora Sky's operations called the cockpit. At first, the voice on the radio sounded controlled and professional. The operations representative asked about the captain's condition, the instrument failures, and the aircraft's ability to continue. But then came a question that did not belong in an emergency call. They asked whether Maya Reed was in the cockpit. For a moment, the storm seemed quieter. Evan looked toward Maya. Nora, who had returned with the leather bag, stood near the cockpit door and understood immediately that the company had not learned Maya's name by accident. Graham Voss had already made his calls. He had already started trying to shape the story before the aircraft had even touched the ground. Maya had once been afraid of what her name could do to her. She had watched it become a warning whispered in airline offices. She had watched former colleagues avoid her because defending her might make them inconvenient too. She had watched her career become a rumor that other people used to protect themselves. But the storm had stripped away every reason to be afraid. She told operations the truth. She was a former Aurora Skies captain with experience on that aircraft type. She was assisting the first officer during an active medical emergency. The aircraft needed priority. The crew needed a safe runway. Nothing else mattered. The operations representative suggested a diversion to a larger company-controlled airport farther away, where Aurora Skies could send its own staff and manage the emergency privately. It sounded reasonable to anyone who did not understand what the aircraft was telling them. But Maya understood. A farther airport meant more time inside the storm. More time meant more moisture, more electrical demand, more chances for the unstable system to fail again. And a company-controlled airport would give Graham Voss more time to gather people, shape records, and decide which version of the truth the world would hear first. Maya did not argue emotionally. She did not mention Voss. She did not make accusations over an open radio frequency. She simply explained the facts to Evan, and Evan made the decision that mattered. Graybridge Field was closer. Graybridge Field had a runway long enough for the aircraft if the approach remained stable. Graybridge Field had emergency crews ready, and Graybridge Field was the safest option they had. The controller confirmed the diversion. That was the moment Graham Voss began to lose control. Behind the cockpit door, he could still make phone calls. He could still speak to company lawyers and senior executives. He could still try to convince himself that the situation could be contained. But every minute, Flight 718 moved toward Graybridge Field. The possibility of containment became smaller. If the aircraft landed safely, investigators would examine it. If investigators examined it, they would find the electrical components. If they found the components, they would find the maintenance records. And if they found the records, they might discover why Maya Reed had been forced out 3 years earlier. Nora returned to the cabin after bringing Maya's bag forward. She moved from row to row with a steadiness that kept the passengers from seeing how serious the situation had become. A young mother held her daughter close. An elderly man kept his eyes shut and whispered words only he could hear. A boy with a small toy airplane no longer asked his mother whether they would be all right. He simply gripped the toy in both hands and stared at the darkness beyond the window. Near the front of the cabin, one passenger stood despite the seatbelt sign and demanded answers. He wanted to know why the captain was not speaking. He wanted to know why a woman with a controversial past had been allowed into the cockpit. He spoke loudly because fear often tries to disguise itself as anger. Nora did not give him the story he wanted. She told him that the crew was handling an emergency and that everyone on board needed to remain seated. When he continued to protest, the aircraft dropped hard through a pocket of turbulence. His balance disappeared before his argument did. He grabbed the top of a seat and realized in one sudden and humiliating instant that there were no important passengers on that airplane. There were only people who needed the crew to bring them home. He sat down. In the cockpit, Maya opened the old metal case from her bag. Inside were the notes her father had kept for years. Some were stained from workshops and rain. Some were folded at the corners. Some carried diagrams that only someone trained to recognize patterns would understand. Daniel Reed had never expected those pages to become evidence. He had written them because he believed that knowledge had a duty. If something dangerous was happening, someone had to leave a record of it. Maya found the page she was looking for. It described a family of electrical units that could behave unpredictably under extreme moisture and fluctuating demand. The failures could begin quietly. A display could reset. A warning could blink and disappear. A circuit could recover just long enough for someone to decide there was no real problem. But under pressure, the instability could spread. Maya looked from the notebook to the failing display. The patterns matched. It was not proof of every detail. Not yet. But it was enough to understand the immediate danger. The aircraft still had reliable primary data. The engines were stable. The flight controls were responding. But the electronic systems could no longer be trusted completely. And the longer they stayed inside the storm, the more dangerous that uncertainty became. She explained what she believed to Evan without overwhelming him. The goal was not to solve 3 years of corruption in the middle of a storm. The goal was to land the airplane before the next failure took away something they could not afford to lose. Evan listened. Then he did something Maya would remember long after the flight was over. He stopped trying to prove that he was in control. Instead, he accepted help. That was the difference between arrogance and courage. Arrogance demanded that a person face danger alone, so no one could see them afraid. Courage understood that survival sometimes required trusting the person beside you. The descent toward Graybridge Field began. The aircraft entered lower cloud, where the rain felt heavier and the turbulence sharper. Every few seconds, lightning exposed the wings before returning them to darkness. The runway lights appeared once through the weather, then vanished again. The cockpit was no longer full of alarms, but the silence between the warnings felt worse. Air traffic control reported worsening wind conditions. Rainwater had begun pooling along parts of the runway. Several aircraft had already diverted. Emergency vehicles were waiting near the landing area, their lights reflecting through the storm like distant signals from another world. Maya studied the approach information. The conditions were difficult, but not impossible. That distinction mattered. They did not have a normal landing ahead of them. They had an exhausted first officer, a captain who could not help, unreliable displays, a severe crosswind, and a system defect that seemed to be spreading through the aircraft in slow, deliberate waves. But they also had a runway. They had engines. They had enough instruments. And they had time if they did not waste it. Maya told Evan they would need to prepare for a manual approach. The automated systems had done enough to bring them close, but the final moments would depend on human judgment. Evan hesitated, not because he did not understand, but because he understood exactly how much was being asked of him. Maya did not tell him to be fearless. She reminded him that fear was not the enemy. losing focus was. He had the aircraft beneath his hands. He had the runway ahead. He had the training he had spent years earning. And he had someone beside him who knew what it felt like to carry a room full of strangers through the worst moment of their lives. Evan nodded. The clouds thinned for a few seconds. Below them, Graybridge Field appeared. The runway lights glowed through the rain, narrow and distant, surrounded by darkness. For one brief moment, everyone in the cockpit could see where they needed to go. Then a powerful gust hit the aircraft from the side. The plane rolled sharply. A warning tone sounded. The remaining navigation display flickered again. Evan's breath caught. The runway vanished behind rain. And somewhere in the cabin, 186 people realized that the most dangerous part of the flight had only just begun. For a few seconds, there was no runway. There was only rain. There was only wind. There was only the violent sound of an aircraft being pushed sideways through the dark by forces no human being could control. Evan tightened his grip on the controls, but Maya could see the moment when fear tried to take over again. It was there in the way his eyes moved too quickly from one instrument to another. It was there in the breath he did not finish. It was there in the silence that came just before someone either found their training or lost it. Maya stayed with him. She did not take the airplane from his hands. She did not try to become the hero of the story by doing everything herself. Evan was the pilot flying, and the only way they would survive was if he remained connected to the aircraft instead of surrendering to panic. So Maya gave him one instruction at a time. She kept his attention on the remaining instruments. She helped him trust the physical feel of the aircraft when the screens could not be trusted. She reminded him that a crosswind did not need to be defeated. It needed to be understood. The plane would move. The storm would push. Their job was not to force the sky into obedience. Their job was to make the next correct decision before the next dangerous second arrived. Behind them, Nora kept the cabin from falling apart. The passengers could feel the descent. They could feel the aircraft being thrown from side to side. They heard the engines change as Evan adjusted power. They heard the storm strike the fuselage like heavy stones. Some people cried. Some people held the hands of strangers. Some stared at the seatbacks in front of them because looking out the window felt impossible. Nora moved through that fear with the quiet strength of someone who understood that people did not always need answers. Sometimes they needed a face that told them they had not been abandoned. She checked seatbelts. She helped a frightened child hold on to a parent's hand. She guided an elderly passenger through slow breaths. And when panic rose near the front of the cabin, she did not allow it to become a fire that spread through the rows. Even Graham Voss had gone quiet. The man who had tried to stop Maya from reaching the cockpit could no longer pretend that he was protecting anyone. Every new movement of the aircraft reminded him that the woman he had tried to destroy was now helping save his life. He understood, perhaps for the first time, that the truth was not dangerous because it embarrassed him. The truth was dangerous because it had consequences. The runway lights appeared again. This time, they did not vanish immediately. They were still distant, still blurred by rain, still narrow enough to make the approach feel unforgiving. But they were there. Evan saw them. Maya saw them. And in that moment, the cockpit changed. Not because the danger had passed, but because uncertainty had become a direction. The aircraft continued downward. Wind struck again, harder than before. The nose shifted. The wings dipped. The wet runway moved across the windshield, then disappeared at the edge of Maya's vision. Evan corrected too sharply at first, then steadied himself when Maya reminded him to make smaller movements. The storm wanted panic. It wanted a desperate reaction. But Maya had learned long ago that the most dangerous mistakes were usually born from trying to fix everything too fast. The plane crossed the threshold. For one endless second, it seemed as though the runway would remain just out of reach. Then the wheels touched down. The landing was hard. The aircraft hit the wet pavement with enough force to throw the cabin forward against its seatbelts. Water erupted from beneath the tires. Reverse thrust filled the night with a roar. The runway lights streaked past the windows as Evan held the aircraft straight through the wind. No one cheered immediately. The people in the cabin were too afraid to trust what they had felt. They waited. They waited for the engines to quiet. They waited for the violent shaking to stop. They waited for the aircraft to slow enough for their bodies to believe what their minds could not yet accept. Then Flight 718 came to a stop. For several seconds, there was only rain tapping against the fuselage and the broken sound of people trying to breathe again. Then someone began to cry. Someone else began to clap. The applause spread slowly. Not as celebration at first, but as release. People held one another. Parents pressed their faces into their children's hair. Strangers, who had never spoken before, reached across the aisle and touched each other's hands. They had gone into the storm as passengers, but they came through it as witnesses to the same impossible night. In the cockpit, Evan leaned back from the controls with the stunned expression of a man who had just discovered how close he had come to losing everything. He had not flown perfectly. No one could have in those conditions. But he had stayed present. He had listened. He had learned that courage was not a performance. It was a decision made over and over again when every part of you wanted to give up. Maya sat beside him, exhausted, but still. She did not raise her arms. She did not ask for recognition. She looked through the rain-streaked windshield toward the emergency lights waiting on the runway. And for the first time in 3 years, she allowed herself to feel something she had tried not to need. She felt seen, not by executives, not by reporters, not by the company that had taken everything from her. She felt seen by the truth itself. Captain Luis Herrera was taken from the cockpit after the aircraft had stopped and received urgent medical care. He survived. The medical crisis had been serious, but it was not the end of his story. Later, after he learned what had happened, he would understand that the people he had trusted behind him had carried his passengers through the one moment when he could not. But the night was not over. The moment the wheels touched the ground, Flight 718 stopped being only an emergency landing. It became evidence. Investigators entered the cockpit before the storm had fully moved away from Graybridge Field. They secured the flight data. They documented the electrical warnings. They examined the maintenance history. They took custody of the component information. And when Maya placed her father's metal case on the table in the airport interview room, the old notes that had once seemed like the private worry of an ignored technician became part of a much larger question. Why had the aircraft failed the way it had? Why did its maintenance records contain gaps? Why had Maya Reed been removed from Aurora Skies after raising similar concerns 3 years earlier? And why had Graham Voss seemed so terrified the moment he learned she was in the cockpit? Voss tried to regain control the way he always had. He made calls. He asked for lawyers. He attempted to frame the situation as an unfortunate combination of weather, a medical emergency, and an employee with a personal grievance against the airline. He wanted investigators to see Maya as a former captain who had returned to the cockpit carrying old resentment. But that story collapsed as soon as the evidence began to speak. The flight data recorder showed the sequence of electrical failures. The maintenance records revealed repeated component changes, that did not match the parts supposedly installed. The missing number Maya had noticed years earlier turned out not to be a harmless clerical error. It had broken the chain of identification for a series of units that should never have returned to active aircraft service. Components had been listed as new when they had been rebuilt, relabeled, and moved through a supplier called Horizon Avionics Solutions. At first, Horizon appeared to be only another vendor in a complicated aviation supply chain. Then investigators followed the money. They found payments routed through companies that existed mostly on paper. They found contracts approved through layers of signatures designed to make responsibility difficult to trace. They found maintenance supervisors who had been pressured to sign forms they did not fully understand. They found workers who had been told that raising questions would cost them their jobs. And eventually, they found the financial links that connected Horizon Avionics Solutions to a network of shell companies controlled by people loyal to Graham Voss. The same man who had called Maya unstable had profited from the weakness she had tried to expose. The same man who had treated safety reports as obstacles had built a system that rewarded silence. The same man who had tried to stop Maya from reaching the cockpit had known exactly why she could not be allowed to speak. Once the truth began moving, it moved faster than Voss could contain. Former mechanics came forward. Record specialists came forward. A retired quality control manager produced copies of internal emails that had been saved in private because he had never trusted the company to keep them. A supervisor admitted that some replacement units had been approved under pressure, even when the documentation was incomplete. Another employee revealed that Maya's report had not been dismissed because it lacked evidence. It had been dismissed because it had too much. And every new witness made the old story harder to believe. Maya was called to testify before an aviation oversight panel weeks later. She arrived wearing no captain's uniform. She did not need one. The uniform had never been the source of her authority. Her authority came from the fact that she had seen danger, spoken about it, and refused to become silent when silence was easier. She did not turn the hearing into revenge. She did not raise her voice. She explained what she had found 3 years earlier. She explained why the missing number mattered. She explained how maintenance records were supposed to protect passengers, not protect executives. She explained that safety was not a slogan painted on a corporate wall. It was a series of decisions made by ordinary people who either chose to tell the truth or chose to look away. Then she opened her father's metal case. Inside were the notes Daniel Reed had written before anyone believed they would matter. He had spent his life trying to make aircraft safer. He had never asked for a title. He had never asked to be remembered. He had only believed that someone had to leave a record when something did not feel right. For years, that record had been ignored. Now it sat before the people who had the power to act. Graham Voss watched from across the hearing room as the story he had spent years controlling came apart piece by piece. The reports he had buried returned as evidence. The maintenance signatures he had trusted became questions. The missing number he had believed no one would notice became the thread that pulled the entire deception apart. His downfall was not dramatic because he shouted or confessed in front of cameras. It was dramatic because he had built his power on the belief that no one would ever make him answer for what he had done. And now, one by one, people were asking. The board removed him from his position. Federal investigators opened criminal cases connected to fraud, falsified maintenance records, and the financial network behind Horizon Avionics Solutions. Months later, Graham Voss was taken into custody, while the same news cameras he had once tried to manage waited outside. There was a certain justice in the way it happened. Voss had spent years using paperwork to hide danger. In the end, paperwork exposed him. He had silenced people by making them feel small. In the end, the people he had ignored became the witnesses who brought him down. He had treated Maya Reed's name like a problem to be erased. In the end, her name became impossible to separate from the truth. Aurora Skies offered Maya an apology. It came with compensation, public statements, and an invitation to return. They offered her a senior position. They offered to restore the career they had helped destroy. They spoke about rebuilding trust and creating a safer culture. For many people, that offer would have seemed like victory. But Maya understood something they did not. Some doors were not meant to be reopened. She accepted the apology because acknowledgement mattered. She accepted the compensation because justice did not require her to pretend that harm had never been done. But she did not return to Aurora Skies. Instead, Maya used part of what she received to build something that did not depend on anyone powerful deciding who deserved to be heard. She created the Daniel Reed Aviation Fellowship. It began in a modest simulator training center near a small airport, where young people from neighborhoods that had never seen aviation as an option could learn about aircraft systems, emergency procedures, maintenance ethics, and the responsibility that came with stepping into a cockpit. Maya did not teach them that pilots were heroes. She taught them that pilots were human. She taught them that fear was normal, but silence could be dangerous. She taught them that a checklist was not just a list of tasks. It was a promise to everyone who trusted you with their life. She taught them that when something felt wrong, they had the right to ask questions. And perhaps most importantly, she taught them that no title, no paycheck, and no powerful person was worth more than the truth. Evan Cole visited the center months after Flight 718. The storm had changed him too. He had returned to flying after additional training, but he no longer confused confidence with control. He understood that asking for help had not made him weak. It had helped save 186 people. Nora Bell came too. She stood quietly near the simulator room and watched Maya guide a nervous student through an emergency procedure. Nora had seen Maya at her lowest point, standing in a cabin aisle while a powerful man tried to stop her from doing the right thing. Now she saw what had come from that moment. Not revenge, not bitterness, purpose. Captain Luis Herrera eventually recovered and wrote Maya a letter. He did not write it as an airline captain to a former captain. He wrote it as one human being to another. He thanked her for protecting the passengers he had been unable to protect himself. He thanked her for believing in Evan when Evan had begun to doubt himself. And he thanked her for proving that a person's worth could not be decided by the people who had once tried to take everything from them. Years later, passengers still remembered Flight 718. Some remembered the storm. Some remembered the hard landing. Some remembered the woman in the ordinary coat who stood up from seat 34B when everyone else was too frightened to move. But Maya remembered something else. She remembered her father's old notes. She remembered the missing number. She remembered the years when people told her that speaking up would only make things worse. And she remembered the truth that finally carried her through the storm. The sky had never judged her by her past. It had never cared whether she wore a captain's uniform, whether an executive approved of her, or whether a company tried to erase her name. The sky only asked one thing. When people trusted her with their lives, would she respect the truth? Maya Reed did. And because she did, 186 people came home. Because she did, a man who believed he was untouchable finally had to answer for what he had done. And because she did, a new generation of future pilots, mechanics, and engineers learned that courage was not always loud. Sometimes courage was a missing number in a maintenance record. Sometimes it was an old notebook nobody wanted to read. Sometimes it was a woman standing up in seat 34B, even when the most powerful man on the plane wanted her to sit back down. The truth may take time. It may be ignored. It may be buried beneath fear, money, and silence. But when the storm comes, the truth is often the only thing strong enough to guide people home. If this story reminds you that doing the right thing matters, even when no one stands beside you, hold on to that lesson. Because the world does not become safer when brave people stay quiet. It becomes safer when they speak.